and Renee, right?
Yeah.
Amanda were recognized at the Shared Risk and Protective Factors Conference with over 600 participants for the great collaborative work that they have done to align CNP and CTC. That's a big I don't know if she shared with all of you that she was really pointed out for the work that they've done together, but that you guys should be really proud in Moffat County that they're bringing such a great name. So.
I'm Brenda Cisco. I'm just doing an internship in Northwest Colorado College. I'm just here to learn.
My name's Marky Green and I work at Moffat County Human Services as a child welfare worker and foster care coordinator. And just getting an overall understanding of the crossover youth practice model so that better work with the families and the youth and work within our community.
I'm Laura Carpenter, I'm a child welfare worker at Moffat County DHS. Can I just say the same answer?
Hi, I'm Melissa Autry. I work for Mind Springs Health, and I'm the day treatment clinician, so much of my clientele is crossover youth, and so I'm just here to learn how to better serve those kids.
Hi, I'm Brett Sloan. I'm with probation, and I just want to gain a greater awareness of congregate care.
Brett Sloan with one team.
Exactly, you got this.
I'm Brian Potts. I'm with the Division of Youth Services. I sit on the Moffat County Interagency Oversight Group, IOG. For me, crossover youth are kids that are coming out of child welfare, headed into diversion, headed into my system, headed into probation, all that lovely stuff. And we've been talking about congregate care up here for years. Mr. Moe's been at one of our previous meetings that we had where we discussed this. So with the Families First Act, my concern is that we don't have a bunch of kids ending up in detention because we don't have foster families to place them in.
Thank you.
Tara Wilkewitz, I'm the Director of Youth Services and the CYDC Case Manager for Moffat County. And pretty much everything Brian just said, you know, I work with all the populations, serve a lot of kids, and we don't have a lot of resources, so a lot of our kids do end up in congregate care, and how we can kind of bridge that and work together with those kiddos for the best interest.
I'm Ryan Fritz. I'm a school resource officer with the Craig Police Department, primarily out of the high school, and I kind of dabble in everybody's business a little bit, but I'm kind of the tip of the spear when it comes to identifying some of these kids, and along with teachers and counselors and staff at the schools, but actually working very hard to not get these kiddos involved in the juvenile justice system, but identifying the moderate to high risk kids that are potentially going to be involved in with at least one or more groups that are here today.
And I'm Sandra Gardner. When Ryan's efforts fail, I see kids. I'm with the court systems.
Mick O'Hara, I'm also a judge, and I'd love to learn some solutions to the problems that we have.
Susie Morris with the Division of Child Welfare, and I'm the new subject matter expert for Moffat County and here to support the department.
So she's with the State Department at our office.
I'm Jessica Cochran. I'm a child welfare caseworker, and I would like to learn more about the crossover program and how we can better serve our families.
My name is Lindsay Nassmore. I'm the Assistant County Attorney and I represent DHS. So I deal a lot with JV and JD cases. So would like to figure out what we can do to reduce all of those numbers across the board and what we can do to get kids out of congregate care.
Nicole Schatz. I am the Child and Adult Protection Supervisor at Human Services here in Moffat County. I basically echo what everyone else says. We have a large number of youth in congregate care and a large number of crossover youth. And I would like to figure out a way for us to be more proactive and getting the services and support in place for our children and families to even prevent them from coming into foster care. And so that's really what I'm here to do.
I'm Melissa Petrick. I'm Director Rose's assistant, and I'm here to make sure it's our project.
I love it.
And so much more.
I'm Dolly Rose, I'm the Director of Department of Human Services here in Moffat County, and like we've all said, I mean, we're here to learn how we can decrease some of these numbers and do what's in the best interest of the kids that we serve. And thank you guys for coming to the show.
Craig Thornhill, Program Director, Mind Springs Health. I guess the other hat I wear that's relevant would be the chair for the Moffat County IOG, Interagency Oversight Group, to get the acronym out there. I think Brian already said it though. Crossover youth, I guess, to me, multi-system engagement, moving up to higher risk into the court system, et cetera. Hoping to get away, pull out of here what most have already said. How do we get upstream? How do we have more of a coordinated community effort? How do we streamline and use our money and funding smarter instead of harder? And to me, that's, clarifying roles and some different things. I guess the last piece, while I have a chunk of important folks in this room, is how does this community recruit and retain appropriate credentialed professionals? That's a whole rabbit hole in and of itself, but that is a huge gap that I see that impacts our ability to keep folks in the treatment upstream of their needs. So just that piece.
So just to kind of set the stage a little bit, I do want to talk about some acronyms for a second. This work cannot happen without our JSPC, or Juvenile Services Planning Commission group, as well as our Interagency Oversight Group, so one is out of Senate Bill 94, or CYDC, which I'm going to use interchangeably today just because everybody's so used to Senate Bill 94 for, 20 some years, 24. And so CYDC is still getting used to. And the Collaborative Management Interagency Oversight Group. So Matt Friedson, who is the coordinator of the Senate Bill 94 program, and myself go hand in hand. His position and my position are equal at the state. He oversees the Senate Bill 94 program, and I oversee the Collaborative Management program. He wasn't able to come today, but really wanted to because it is really important that we're working those two groups together in order to address this, because I think where we get in a lot of trouble when we talk about crossover youth is when we're talking about your youth and my youth, and it belongs in this system or that system. But really at the end of the day, I hope that we are all coming together and saying our youth and our young people that are involved in these systems. Because when we're rubbing each other the wrong way, the only people that suffer are the kids and families that we serve. And so I think the whole goal of today is how do we start to become a community that is saying our youth and what's the right door and the right service at the right time in the right place. And so that's really my bigger goal and goal for Moffat County and every county that we're working with to try to get the crossover youth practice model implemented in. I'm going to talk a little bit about the new legislation around the crossover youth practice model that passed. Melinda's going to talk a little bit about the Families First Act, as well as another Senate Bill,
House Bill
1319, and how all of these services, and it's like the perfect storm in Colorado, and I'm very excited about where we could go with all of these changes. But all that being said, it's also scary. Like, I'm not going to pretend that it's not scary for you as a county as well as us for a state, because we really are going to have to hold on to our hats because it's a lot of change. So the Families First Act is changing the way that child welfare does business. It is completely changing the funding structure. It's completely changing everything. And we also have a lot of changes around some legislation that's happening. So we are going to have to work together in a way that we never have before and really have this our community philosophy. So I'm so proud of where Moffat has come from. When I first started in this position, I came, and this is when I think I first met your commissioners, and we facilitated a meeting, and Dolly had just started, I think, as the director, and just really talked about how we come together. And from then until now, which I think was 3 years ago, maybe 4.
Almost 3.
Oh, okay. That I have seen you guys grow and come together in such a way that a lot of communities have not done. So I'm proud of the work that you guys have done. I often talk about Moffat County in statewide venues and how far you guys have come in your journey. We still have some ways to go. And I think that you're willing to do the work, so.
And we use Moffat County as a model of small communities, rural communities that really care about one another and care about your community. We use you as an example as a community that hadn't always worked together in the last 20, 25 years, but are now seeing the fruits of your labor. And it's been it's takes some time, but good change, good meaningful change takes time. I think it's important to note that both Tiffany and I also worked at county departments, so it's really, I think, frustrating at times when you have state folks coming down and saying, you need to do this and you need to do that. We really want this to be county and community led. So please know that that's our focus today. We're here to provide the information, but it's important to note that we really want this to be county and community led. These are your people, these are your communities, and the youth that are here, we want them to stay here. Because when they go somewhere else, they learn really bad things and they come back to their community because this is what they know. So that's what we want to prevent. So we're going to be here just giving you the information, maybe some tools, and then really trying to facilitate where you want to go.
And just to piggyback on that a little bit, I always like to share, like, when I got hired to work for the Division of Child Welfare, I have no idea why they hired me, frankly, because all of my experience was with the Division of Youth Corrections, so now it's Division of Youth Services. So please know that I think they hired me in this position because I know both the juvenile justice side, my degrees are all in juvenile justice, and I worked in the County Department of Human Services. So I have seen both systems, I've lived both systems. I worked for DYS for 10 years. I've only worked for child welfare for about 7 years. And so my position is so unique, and the reason they've really had myself and Gretchen Russo be the lead on this is because we are the two that have been on both sides. And so we want to help you. We want to be a huge resource for you. And so we will leave all of our contact information. If you can't reach me, you can always reach Gretchen or Melinda. And we want to be that resource for you when things are hard. So we're not just going to meet today and then walk away. So all of that being said, I want to turn it over to Dolly, and she's going to kind of present the state of where we're at with child welfare and congregate care. Before you start, let's define what congregate care is.
I was going to say, does everyone know what congregate care is? Because some communities use the words congregate care, some communities use different terms for the same thing.
So congregate care basically is a level of care where you're not in a home-like setting. So we consider congregate care a group home or a residential treatment center. I think people also get confused between detention and commitment often. And so detention, please, and you're certainly the expert, so please jump in and don't let me speak out of turn, is pre-adjudicated is when you're in detention. When you have had, usually, let's hope, chances with being placed outside of your home, then you get committed to the Division of Youth Services, and they actually become your active, they're your legal guardian. So that's the difference between detention is really front end, and commitment is really at the very end of the system. Brian or Tara, do you want to add anything to that? Did I get it right? Okay. Okay. So we'll turn it over to Dawn.
Again, thank you all for coming. I just put together a quick PowerPoint presentation, and some of you guys have seen this information before, but some of it is also new. So the facts about...
Let's turn the lights down, because I think that might be hard to hear if that's possible. I mean, hard to hear, hard to see.
So the facts about congregate care, what we know about congregate care is that it's not good for kids, and they're almost 2.5 times more likely to become delinquent than their peers that have been in foster care. They have poor educational outcomes. They're more likely to drop out of school and less likely to graduate high school. They're at a greater risk for further physical abuse, and they are less successful than their peers in foster care. This year, so far, our projected placement cost, this is including foster care, is almost $618,000. Our total projected congregate care cost, this is including fee for service, so any services that you receive in the care, is at almost $570,000. That's about 92% of our total placement cost going just towards congregate care. This is kind of a history, 2015-16, 16-17, and our projected for 17-18. As you can see, in 15-16 we were around $300,000. Then it went down in 16-17 to about $270,000. And then this year, we're up $300,000 projected. So we're at $569,000. So as you can see, over the last 3 years, we've spent over $1 million alone in congregate care. Currently, the state covers 80% of that, and the county covers 20% of that. There are some new federal laws that are coming out, and I don't think we'll know exactly until October, but what it's sounding like to me, and you guys can correct me, is that they're only willing to pay the first 2 weeks, and then it's going to be county-only funds, 100%. Yeah, so.
And just to add to that, just to, not to interrupt you, but to piggyback, when she talks about $80-20, I think it's really important to know that you get a certain allocation from the state at the beginning of the year. So July 1st, Moffat County will get this chunk of money. And let's say you get a chunk of money to place 10 kids out of care, right? And I'm just exaggerating all these numbers just for the ease of it. And you end up placing 15 kids in out-of-home care. Those 5 kids that you place that are above and beyond that 10 that you had money for becomes county-only dollars. So what that means is Dolly has to go to the commissioners and say, hey, I need more money because we had to place this many kids outside of the home. And that's taking money out of Moffat County, meaning that you don't have as much money for roads and bridges and prevention programs and all of those things that become county-only funds. And so, did I get that correct? Or
well, you did, but what happens if the county says, we don't have the money, we cannot do it?
So yes. So actually, this is towards the back of my presentation.
Okay.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. We can talk about it now. So well, maybe we should wait.
Just go ahead.
Okay, we'll wait. We'll get there. So the state has goals for us in every one of our areas that they want us to perform in, and the state goal for congregate care is to be under 6.1% of children or youth that are placed in congregate care. So we should be under 6.1% of our.
So if we say
all children.
So if we go with that same scenario of 10 kids that you have. So let's say Moffat County has 10 kids they're working with. 6% of those 10 kids can be placed in congregate care. The rest have to be placed in a home-like setting.
So it's 6% of the children in the child welfare system in Moffat County already.
Correct.
Is that just child welfare, or does that include the juvenile delinquency? Because that also.
So it includes any kid that they have to open a case on. That would include your juvenile justice kids that you place outside of the home, because the department, many of you may not know this, is that in order to place somebody outside of the home, the department's the only one that has the legal authority to do that. And so they have to, if probation comes and says, we need your help, because we need it, or your detention says we need to place that kid outside of the home, then Dolly has to open a case in order to serve that young person.
So we only want whole kids, but we're talking numbers, so if there was 10 kids and you averaged up, we're talking 1 out of 10, you're still above that, but just
you are.
For percentage purposes, we have 10, we need to limit it to 1.
Right, and you have more than that. Please hear me say, but that is what you're looking at. So basically, 6% a very small percentage of the kids that you have.
It is, and so this is for the month of March. I don't have current data because it comes out a little late. But for the month of March, Moffat County was at 35.3%. And as you can see, in May of 2017, we were at 23%, which is still unacceptable, but you can see that in the last year, it has significantly increased. Currently in March, the other 44 small counties were at 7.8%. So they still weren't meeting that state goal, but they're significantly lower than Moffat County. I know that I've heard today that we don't have a lot of services here to provide in our community, and we are a small rural community, but we do have quite a few services. And at the department over the last 3 years, we really have implemented some new programs and some new services in order to try to combat this. We haven't quite got there yet. So I just listed all of the services that we do have locally. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
We all can read, but
Okay.
but can you go over them quickly so that we all understand what is available?
Yep,
please?
so this first one listed, I'm actually gonna have Nicole talk about, you know, mouthful back there. So this is a new program. The state actually came to us and asked us to pilot this new program. And we're gonna be the only ones that are allowed to do this. And it's a coach-like youth engagement. And I'll let Nicole kind of talk about it.
So it's modeled after a current program that the state has implemented. And essentially, we're still kind of working on all of the kinks, but essentially we will be working with our youth in congregate care in a different way. So our engagement is going to be more coach-like and really helping the youth identify goals rather than being told what to do and looking at the compliance aspect. It's really putting it back into here's child welfare, here's your goal. You know, let's talk about permanency, these sorts of things. And it's really just engaging the youth in a different way. We will be meeting with them on a more regular basis, not necessarily face-to-face, but we may be on phone or Skype with them every week, every other week, where right now we don't have it. So we're really taking on a lot of extra work to try to get our youth the services and support they need. Another, I think, very important part of that is it'll really help the youth and give them skills to work within the court system and the judicial system. So we will either be training them on how to give their own court report in court, and or we will be writing court reports and they will be helping us write those court reports and provide the information that they feel is important and necessary. So it's really looking at those youth and giving them skills to get them in a place where they can also advocate for themselves. And we're hoping to see maybe a shift in congregate care usage and length and really better preparing our youth for adulthood as well.
If I remember right, you can correct me, Nicole, but when they approached us about the pilot program, and I think one of the things that sparked and was one of the driving factors when they started it is the high rate of homelessness with kids that have been in congregate care. And so that was one of the factors behind it is kids once they're in congregate care, and what was the percentage? Their likeliness to be homeless because they've been in congregate care is astounding. And so they were trying to come up with new ways of how do we prevent these kids from becoming homeless, because that's just one of the backlashes of congregate care is those juveniles, those kids are, when they get out, they're going to be homeless.
So the state undertook,
they're couch surfers, right?
Yeah. The state undertook a study which was called Predictive Analytics, and it was published, but to talk a lot about youth that age out of the system and permanency and those that achieve permanency. And what we found out is that kids that age out of the system are 82% more likely to not ever have a permanent home. And so what that means is basically they become couch surfers, and we have this what we call transition age youth between 18 and 26. And those transition age youth are the kids that are almost 96% more likely to become involved in the juvenile justice or the justice system at that point, because then they're adults. So it's a great study. I would encourage you really to read it, because predictive analytics goes hand in hand with congregate care, and that's why we know that. And there's studies across the nation. Casey Family Programs, who is the leader in the nation on working with these young people, have done lots and lots of studies of kids in congregate care and how poor their outcomes end up being. Yes.
Can I assume then that those outcomes, excuse me, would be even poorer for children that are in detention?
It depends. So if the youth in detention then become if they go to congregate care, yes, it actually bumps up to 98% less likely to be successful. However, if they were in just detention and didn't end up in congregate care, their likelihood of being successful is much higher. So it's the congregate care piece, taking that congregate care piece, which is the driving factor, because we're taking them out of their home and taking them away from their support system.
Out of the community.
Yes, and out of the community for sure.
Which is what's happening here. Right?
Exactly.
Well, can I ask a question then that's going to sound kind of bullish? and for those of you that know me, it takes a lot to kind of hold me back a little bit sometimes. And Tara has full permission to hit or kick if I start saying something. So the question that pops into my head then at that point is, what's broken in the congregate care system? And what can be improved within congregate care to help these kiddos to be more successful when they are out of congregate care, rather than not sending kiddos to congregate care, and not sending kiddos to a congregate care system that's obviously broken, and what can be fixed about the congregate care system so that these kids can be successful.
So it's not necessarily that the system is broken. I think that if you would talk to the providers in our state, and these are the people who are really upset about the Families First Act, is because they think we're trying to put them out of business, and that is certainly not the case. I think at the very beginning I said the right placement at the right time in the right place. But we are, in the state of Colorado, we are putting way too many kids in congregate care. So what we know is that our highest level, most high-risk kids should be in congregate care, maybe. But the trauma, usually a lot of kids end up in congregate care because they're displaying trauma in a way that we haven't seen before and we don't know how to deal with, so we put them into congregate care. But there is a huge amount of trauma of just taking them out of their home, taking them away from their support systems, taking them away from their community and everything they've ever known. So it's not necessarily that congregate care is broken, it's the act of taking them away from what they know that is causing the issues.
Question, in the congregate care facility that is out of your community, that's another factor.
Yes, and even the congregate care within the facility. So I can tell you our outcomes in Denver. Let's just take Jefferson Hills or Third Way, for example. So we know that Mr. Thorne here is very familiar with Third Way. So we know that when we take a kid from Denver and place them in congregate care in, say, Third Way, that their outcomes are not as good as if we were put in a foster home or a family-like setting or kinship care, because they have that home-like feeling and someone they're connected to and supported by, opposed to a staff member that comes and goes.
I mean, to some degree, congregate care is still an institution, and
it is an
institution
institution.
That those children are learning to become institutionalized.
Yes.
In the same way, it's a little bit different, but like when you send an adult offender to prison,
their
prison
outcomes
does
aren't good
not
either.
provide them better skills to make them better productive adults. They become institutionalized, and so here we're sending children whose brains are not baked, who are still developing, to be institutionalized. And how is that going to get them better and equipped?
So
Then why do kids that go to detention have so much higher success rates?
It's the length of stay.
returning home.
And it's if they're going home to that supportive parent or that supportive person. And so it's about the relationships, it's about the trauma, it's about the caring community, because we like to look at it as a community as a whole versus just a parent. So even if they have to be taken away from their parent, we know the #1 success rate if children can't be raised by their parent is kin. And so, because kin are going to love and care for them the way a parent would. And the next successful then is stranger foster care. So, I mean, there's a lot of steps in between leaving your parents to congregate care that are a lot more successful. We had a question back here.
It was just, I don't disagree with what you said, Officer, that maybe congregate care could do things better, but we have no control over that. What we can at least have some say and input is what we're doing with our kids in our community.
Well,
So-
And it's also a staff member that comes to work an 8-hour day and comes and goes and different people every day versus someone that's there to raise you and say, wow, like I know how to read your cues. Like if you're a parent who like, something seems a little off with my kid today. So let's have a conversation about it, opposed to if there's staff members coming in and out, you don't get to know the kids as well or the youth as well. And so, you know, like, oh, they're acting fool versus like, what's really going on with them?
Well, I'm sure like everybody else in every type of public service business, we've been asked to do more with less for so long, we don't know what we're supposed to be doing with what we're supposed to have. If that makes sense to you guys.
For sure.
I mean,
But Moffat County has been evolving, especially since Dolly's been here. And even community forums that has been happening for the last 3 years. And we've had several, and there's been amazing attendance and participation and just having people at the table is a new thing for Moffat County in the last 30 years. And so you're moving the needle in the right direction. And part of that is how do you provide services in the home before you even have this conversation or have the need to have that youth get into juvenile or get into the need for out-of-home placement, right? And so how do we make sure that there's services in the home, which Moffat County in the last 5 years has forfeited $880,000 in their service delivery pot of money, because that's not how Human Services operated prior to when Dolly arrived, right? So now Human Services is doing a much better job, an amazing job, in trying to provide all these services with that pot of money that goes away. It's not cost savings. That money goes away. And you're basically giving it to Douglas County or the March counties, which is not what you want to do. So we're really trying to be creative in how we provide those services to those families and keep the families intact and keep the families at home. And in turn, ironically, the Families First Prevention and Services Act is going to fund a lot more of your evidence-based promising practices services in the home. So they're incentivizing the right things and not incentivizing the length of stay in congregate care.
We also talk a lot about permanency to go hand in hand with you, and so permanency is a word basically that means that somebody is with them when they leave the care. And so when we talk about permanency, we know that kids that are in congregate care are 80% less likely to find permanency than a kid that's raised in a family-like setting. And so there's a great video on YouTube if you ever want to look at it called Shane, and he actually aged out of care and talks about that he was just wanted someone to call his family. And that's what you don't get when you're in congregate care. You don't get a family.
And an amazing advantage you have here in Moffat County is you have generational families here. You have tons of kin that can help raise these youth, right? And if the kin are not equipped, then let's put services in that home and let's make the whole entire family holistically healthy, right? And so I think that's what Dolly's been concentrating on.
And so how we relate this to, like, as we talk, people think, oh, that's a social service kid, that's a child welfare kid, that's a child welfare kid. Well, the truth is that we know kinship care and foster care works with delinquents as well. So just because they are struggling in the environment they're in with their current parents doesn't mean that they couldn't be in a foster home or what we call treatment foster care, which we're working really hard to get going across the state of Colorado for these hard juvenile delinquents as well. So it's just something to keep in mind, like we're not just talking about abused and neglected kids, we're talking about youth that are juvenile or beyond control of parent. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you are. We also have a contracted in-house therapist. We actually have a new one that recently started. Her name is Jackie Adams, and some of our people will be doing work with her. Throughout the community, there are various mental health services, substance abuse treatment services, in combination with Mine Springs Health and the school district. We have the day treatment alternative program that Melissa is the therapist for. We just recently started the Chafee program, and so that's just getting started. We do facilitated family engagement meetings. We started this year parenting the Love and Logic Way classes. We're holding those in connection with Connections for Kids twice a year. There's equine therapy, home-based intervention, intensive family therapy, life skills, sex abuse treatment, and special economic assistance.
Don, who's doing registered sex treatment? Or is that?
We don't have anyone here locally.
Is that like over the rifle? Is that what I'm thinking?
Denver's the closest we have.
Not even there.
Our families have.
I thought that was, somebody was in county.
No, not it.
Because that's an amazing resource to have.
We did have a provider in Grand Junction, but she just retired, so.
So our rules say that you have to, you shall make the menu of services available in order to utilize core services. So even though they don't have anybody locally, they do have connections with those if needed, which is important.
And something, I don't know if you guys are familiar or not, but our behavioral health organizations are switching over to what we call array or regional care entities. And that is for your western region, which is 22 counties. your Ray and I have met many, many times and talked about the lack of services in the smaller communities. And so I know I met with the top 5 executives there and talked with Colorado Health Plans and talked with them about specifically substance abuse treatment, specifically sex offender treatment, specifically beyond control of parent kind of youth, and how we could get some of those services to smaller communities. So they don't sign their contract with healthcare policy and financing until July 1, but it's the number one thing on their radar, is how do we get the services in the community so we don't have to pull the youth out of their community. So is it fixed yet? No, but like I said, it's the perfect storm of all of these things coming together. So to be continued.
Quick question, because I liked how you said it, and I had not heard the term in a social services setting, a menu of services. I would like to ask the question, should each one of us in this meeting and other people in the community have a menu of services so we know what's available?
Yeah.
Make it happen, please.
I think we could fix that in another way if we staffed kids or youth differently. So we don't have, every person doesn't need to know the answer to everything. We need to come together for their family and let them choose what they need and how to service them.
Well, no, I'm in agreement, it's just, you need
To your
to know what the menu is.
Right.
And if we don't,
Right.
all of us here and other people
Right.
don't know what's on the menu.
Right, so this is what your Department of Education can provide, this is what your Mindscreens can provide, this is what your IOG and your collaborative management can provide, this is what your community of care that can provide. These are all the services, the menu of services that each one of us at this table can provide, and at least you know what's out there, because I think it's just an inventory.
Has CTC done something like
I think Susie might have done something very similar for us.
We've been working on
that? Yeah, okay.
It's already happening.
We're working on it.
It's already
There's been
happening.
like
The
6
magic is
attempts at
happening.
this, I can tell you, in 5 years.
Okay, so the bottom line is, basically for this state fiscal year, our estimated child welfare expenditures minus refunds is $1.4 million. Our total allocation was 1.1, and our estimated over budget is $280,000, and that's due to the increase in our congregate care usage. We are hoping to get mitigated at least 4%, which is $44,000, so that leaves us to the question, what do we do when we don't have the money? So here we are at the end of the state fiscal year, and we're going to be short at least $236,000. I know the county doesn't have the money, so I've applied for mitigation from the state, but the entire state is in a bad.
We're $9 million overspent.
Yes, it's bad statewide. So I'm not sure what'll happen with the final mitigation, but what we are planning to do and what we have really no choice to do is to utilize our reserves. So it's going to take our reserves way down, and I don't know what we'll do next year.
And those reserves come from?
From just the Department of Human Services. It's basically our incentives that we.
Do you have TANF reserves as well?
Mm-hmm.
And that's another, so counties are allowed to have TANF reserves. This means the unspent Colorado Works or basic care assistance or what used to be TANF funds. But there's movement to raise those minimum monthly payments to your families who receive Colorado Works, which would then decrease your reserves. Correct. So there's movement one way and there's movement the other way, so because counties want to keep that reserve for this very reason.
Yes. And there are other programs like CCAP, which is the Child Care Assistance Program. Everybody's, except for Moffat County, thankfully, we are not overspent in that, but a lot of other counties are, and that money can also be utilized. TANF reserves can be utilized to bail out CCAP. So counties are having to use their TANF reserves to bail out child welfare and CCAP. So there's just no money. So that's what we're looking at for this year. Yeah.
Just one more, I always say one more thought, and it's always, everybody knows me well enough, I won't keep interceding. To me, part of the challenge is, it is all about the youth in this case. So anything that comes out of my mouth, I always have in the back of my mind, the youth. Being a commissioner, one of the challenges is, we get the bank statement, but we don't control the checkbook. So we are dealing with a situation of, it's all about the youth, somebody else is writing the checks, we get the bank statement, and we don't have the money.
So if I can speak to that for 1 second, because I think it's important for this bottom line, and what we hope to do with Dolly and Nicole is slash that in half. Because The program that I administer is $55 million statewide. It goes, every single penny goes to 64 counties and 2 tribes. And like I said, in the last 5 years prior to Dolly, Moffat County was forfeiting $880,000 back to all the counties that overspent, right? So I have the expenditure report for this fiscal year, and up to the close of April of 2018, the 10 large was overspent by $2.6 million, and the balance of state was underspent by $1.9 million. So where that $1.9 million goes to is to bail out the 10 large, right? And that has nothing to do with the mitigation of the child welfare block. They're two very different pots of money. So Moffat County is projected to be underspent in this line about $100,000. So what Dolly and Nicole and I are doing is looking at all the things they do to run their core services program, to recruit and retain good therapeutic providers, to go to meetings like this, to do therapeutic service visitations where your case aides are doing parent-child interaction roles and coaching, and moving some of those expenditures from the child welfare box to core services so that we can take $100,000 off of that bottom line. Fair enough?
Can I?
Yes.
So earlier the term used was beyond control of parent, but that does not mean delinquent, correct? I mean, that doesn't have to be a kiddo that's charged with a crime.
That's right.
That's just a kiddo that's out of control that needs services.
Based on many different definitions, the parent, the teacher, you know, I mean, everybody has their level of beyond control, right? And so like, it just depends on who is defining that.
So a lot of the services then that 880 that was remanded back, a lot of those services can be used, that money can be used to help those youth before they become part of the criminal justice system.
That's why I'm here.
Yep, that's where our core services funding comes from, where she said we are underspent right now at about $100,000. We don't get back any of the money that has been given back, but that is the kind of money that we can use for all of these services, any services that we can provide that are therapeutic.
Well, and it also cannot just fall on the backs of the department, right? These are all of our youth, and which is what we had talked about in the very beginning. And so how do we come together as a JSPC, as an IOG, as a community? How do we come together to serve children and youth on the front end before we get to a place where we have to put them in congregate care? So that's what crossover is about, is how do we serve our kids and families differently so that we don't get into a situation like this.
Nicole? And I want to make it clear, we are already using funds to serve those youth.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not that we're not. I mean, for example, our day treatment program, all of those kids are coded youth in conflict because they're beyond the control of something. So those aren't our abuse and neglect cases, most likely. So we are using those services or that funding to address those issues.
And Moffat County has done an amazing job in going from not really providing services with their core and kind of giving that back to the 10 large to really building up a really robust service array. That takes some time. So they've already spent $250,000. It's not that they're not spending money, to your point, is that we're really trying to learn how we can work smarter with the money that you have, and that's serving youth, serving kids earlier, and serving families holistically.
Can some of those services be rendered for kiddos that are youth in conflict or youth beyond control of parent, like before they become truancy cases?
As long as they're not in the DYS system and the Division of Youth Services.
Well, because there's a lot of those kids that are truant kids, that there are issues in the home, there are issues within relationships, there's all kinds of other things that these families need help with to keep their kid in school. And then the teachers and the staff at the school, to include me, we can't help these kids if they're not there.
Right.
You know, I've unfortunately had to make the statement of, I can't be a resource as a school resource officer, I can't be a resource to a student that doesn't show up.
So truancy is that fine line, and where does it fit? And there's been lots of arguments about where truancy fits, and I know there was a bill that they were trying to pass that once again that was going to be on the back of the JSPC, and I think we pushed back really hard on that. JSPCs now can serve truant kids, and they've never been able to before, but really truancy should be a collaborative management program. And it should be something that's addressed through your collaborative management program. So I've been working very close with the state court administrator's office, and Bill DeLisio is the kind of the lead there that is taking on truancy, and how can we deal with truancy differently. And so there are gonna be some pilot programs that we're gonna roll out that come along with money to different counties on how to address truancy. So we're gonna highlight some of the counties that are doing a really good job with truancy.
Otero?
Otero is a great example. So they have
And
a
we've been
child
trying to
model
do what
map.
they're doing there here.
So they have what's called the MAP program in Otero County. It's actually in Bent, Crowley, Otero, because they're one judicial district, kind of like Moffat, Route, and Grand. But so they have taken on the MAP program and do a great job, because what we know is our schools know these kids before any of us do, right? And so if we could do something and the school is saying to us, oh my gosh, this young person needs something, there's trauma in the family, or there's something going on that this young person is struggling, wouldn't it be great if we could serve them there instead of them becoming a detention kid, before them becoming a child welfare kid, before them becoming a probation kid? How do we serve kids differently? And that's really what Families First is about. That's really what the crossover bill is about, is like, how do we start to serve kids in a way that they don't end up in the very end of our system?
We do have several counties that have really thought creatively, because they don't have robust resources in their community. And so they've hired a salaried staff person to actually be housed in the school doing mentoring and doing coaching on non-open child welfare cases, because now we have prevention. We are able to provide services with the funds that we administer, your child welfare block and your core services on those non-open child welfare cases. So we're helping kids in the school, even if they're not like involved in child welfare, because that's where we need to start, right?
And so your day treatment alternative program is something that your collaborative management funds somewhat, and that is a perfect example of how we touch those front-end kids differently. So, Judge?
So, Dolly, I was just trying to go through some of the numbers that you threw out there. And based on all those numbers and my rough estimate that there's 5 kids in care out of Moffat County right now. It would,
I actually counted before I came, and it was for the month of March. Like I said, our things are a little bit, my reports are a little bit behind, but there were 8 for the month of March.
okay. Well, nonetheless, that would indicate there's what? That would mean 21 total kids in child welfare in Moffat County. That sounds like it can't possibly be right. Not families, these are children.
That includes kids, like if you count each individual child and you count the fact that some are in kin placement, we have a few families, and so we took that whole number.
So the congregate care included kin care?
Congregate care includes, that percentage, I believe, includes everyone that we have, I think of it, that we have an open case on.
No.
Whether it's, no?
Everyone that's in our custody.
In your custody.
In our custody.
So you
that's
have,
a big difference.
there's a huge difference between in custody and have an open case.
That was why I asked that question at
Yes.
the beginning, was 6% of what?
Yeah.
So it's all the kids who are in your custody. But the numbers still are about right for what I was thinking of as congregate care, because that's just under $5,000 a month on average, roughly.
Yeah,
right?
some are $8,000 and some are 3.
So the numbers that you have though would be, that would total 5 kids in that kind of a placement.
And we've touched, like, we've served more than that amount of kids this past year, because as you know, they come in and out of care, so.
Yes, I went back and just added up all the kids since January 1. But that was just on the JD side, not on the JV side. And, you know, one of the problems that I think presents, especially in these really small communities, is, you know, even you folks from the state know there's a chunk of children who are not going to be able to be placed with their bio family or their kin, and all the kin are coming in saying, no, I won't take the kid. And they have to go somewhere.
Right.
And these are tough kids, you know, as you know.
I think
teenagers.
Right, and I do not disagree with you at all, but where I do struggle is that Moffat County versus the rest of the balance of state. So, you know, that like if we look at Moffat County versus the rest of the balance of state, so we can compare it to Baca County, which is a smaller county, so one kid may throw them over the percentage,
Right.
which Moffat County is much bigger than Baca County. So, I mean, it's about practice sometimes. partners.
Well, and remember when I said that the amazing advantage to Moffat County is that you have a generational families here, which makes your communities very strong and robust? That is also a disadvantage, because you know that some of your families are not as healthy as other families, right? And so how do we look at the families that are on the cusp of needing human services, but serve them first? Serve them holistically as a family entity, a family unit, so you break that chain of needing any type of assistance, right? And so, but that takes time. That you're changing generational, lifestyles. But I know that you're vested in doing it because you're doing it.
I think the truancy piece that Mr. Fritz is talking about is really important too, because I don't know what the school's view is on all of this stuff, but I see families that don't appear to put education high on the priority list. And if mom and dad don't care whether the kid's going to school, the kid learns not to care if they're going to school. And a lot of times that is one of those generational things that we see happen. And then we're stuck. And then if truancy is isolated, and the department's not allowed to help in a truant situation.
I can think of one family that now has a third generation that the kid is basically an 8th grade dropout.
Well, what's interesting,
And that's a third generation.
being next to a resort community, so you have a lot of folks that maybe work here and to work at the resort community. It's, I think, something that a lot of the communities next to resort communities struggle with, because the value of education hasn't always been there, right? Like the generational valuing of education. So that's why the sooner we can intervene, the more success we have. So if we start intervening at the elementary level and those kind of levels and help them understand when the education is important, that's where we're going to see a lot more success, because if we're intervening at middle school and high school, it's too late.
So 2 points to that. Number one, that's where Otero's doing it right.
Right.
Because they're really concentrating on those
Elementary school kids.
elementary age
Yep.
kids. And Renee knows, because we'll get calls from principals all the time. I need you to check on this kid. I know they're not 6 yet. They're not required to be here yet. However, they're already developing a pattern. And these are families that we know professionally in my business, and things that we deal with that maybe they're not involved as delinquents, either because they're not of that age yet, or they just haven't done anything yet, but their families certainly are involved with law enforcement in the justice system and everything else. And, and identifying and getting, that's kind of where I've been reaching a bit of mire, is getting those kids that are truant at the elementary level identified, and then not only just not the truant, and I really, it's probably sounding like I'm harping on the truancy thing, but my thinking is, what's the root cause problem? These kids aren't not going to school because they don't care about school. Well, some of them maybe, or maybe their parents, but there's some other root problem. Either it's homelessness, or it's poverty, or it's mental health, or substance abuse, or...
Studies have shown that when you have a truant child, that it stems from the family having mental health and substance use disorder issues. Because that's where it stems from.
So we have a question back there, and then we'll come back. I think
it's important that we understand cultural pieces. So like a family, not all families across the board are going to have the same cultural understanding as the person next door to them. And I think a huge thing is engagement. Like it's the way we present ourselves to families, that like how do they feel comfortable like taking any of the things that we have to offer without feeling like they're always doing something wrong. So I think a huge piece to be able to help influence our change is our overall engagement as a whole.
Which is the beauty of the crossover youth practice model, which we will get to, but is that it's really about how we engage families differently, and how we engage them as a community, rather than this person's telling them something, this person, this system, this system.
I can say I was an elementary secretary for 10 years, and at least with my principal, that attendance was a huge issue. I pulled out attendance every single week, and when they got to 10%, excuse or not, we went through the steps. It was the first step, the second step, and the third would be to send where you went to court action. If you catch it and you were consistent and you train those parents that those kids have to be at school and the kids learn that that's their job, we never had to get to court. But we did that at elementary, and she was very passionate, and that was something that we did,
And my hope is that we
And those
never
kids
have to
stayed in
get
school
to
by
a
the time they
court
got to middle
issue for truancy youth. Is this because our court system's already way overburdened, right? And so how do we intervene with them differently on the front end about identifying their needs and addressing those needs, rather than it becoming the court sitting in front of people all making recommendations, and it's a hard thing to do, right? You take a piece here and a piece here and a piece here and try to make the best educated decision that you can, but ultimately, we should know those families and understand what it is they need as a community, instead of the bench having to always make those decisions. And I don't mean any disrespect to the bench back there, but am I saying anything inaccurate?
Well, no, I mean, most of the time when we see truancy petitions, the folks who are bringing them believe that they've tried everything else.
Right.
And so they come into court and they want us to either lock up the parent or lock up the child. And we generally won't do it. And then...
I don't know that they come to you wanting the child or the parent locked up. I think that they come to the court system, and they come to the court system frustrated that they've been doing everything they think they can for these families, and nothing's working.
Yeah, and I have the impression that there's a divorce between the truancy issues and the child welfare issues.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that
And
statement.
I'm just saying, I think you look at it, the whole child, look at the whole child or the whole family. Instead of, I don't know if it's the state DHS that draws the line there and says you can't do that, but I think it ends up being a hindrance, and it would be great to see that removed.
So for me, that begs the question, at what point should the department be getting involved in these kinds of cases?
Well, here's the beauty of that. We're not going to dictate that for you, because House Bill 1196 passed several years ago, and it was passed into rule in 2014 that Human Services can get involved with their child welfare block and their core services funds on any family who has a need.
Can, will, should.
That's up to the funding. I mean, that's up to the bottom line, right?
In all fairness, is this a child welfare issue too? Isn't this more of a community issue than the child welfare issue? When did truancy become child welfare, right? And so so my question is that, is it mental health? Is it substance abuse? What is it that's driving that? And so maybe as a community, we should be sitting around the table having those conversations, and just instead of just saying, here, child welfare, we don't know what to do, you guys deal with it.
And that's what I was going to say, is you're all here, you all have a pot of money, and you all have a rationale and a reason to be here, just like CTC, just like collaborative management. These are not only child welfare kids and youth. This is your community's youth. And we've seen that Human Services doesn't have the funding streams to serve every single need, right?
I think regarding some of the early interventions, I think a lot of great ideas have been suggested. I think it's something the department has been very much working on. I think that there's some bigger, and I say this as someone who is new to this job and new to this community, I think there's some bigger community reputation issues that I think we are working on and continue to work on, but we can't go up to someone whose 6-year-old isn't going to kindergarten and force them to be involved with us. If the family isn't choosing to engage, we can't necessarily force them unless we are going to start filing cases for that level of concern. And I think that all the early intervention stuff, I think we're all on the same page, that we see how that'll pay off. I think my concern is, when I look at some of Dolly's slides and these numbers, is right now, unfortunately, we're paying for a lack of early intervention that occurred 10 years ago. And we're in a situation where we are all being forced to make really difficult decisions because we didn't necessarily do all this early intervention stuff in the past. And I guess I just want to hear everyone's ideas. I know I have a few of what we can do to make the current situation, I think it's a bump in the road. I think we are on the path to a better future, but how to deal with the current speed bump that we are currently going over, and probably will for the next few years until we really get to start seeing the benefits from early intervention. I know from my perspective and from the department's perspective, and I know we have different opinions in this room about this, it's what is that end of the line? What warrants it being the end of the line that it is congregate care? I know that we have different opinions about that, I think from the department's perspective, and I won't, kids are going to continue to mess up and under any circumstances, whether they're at home or in congregate care. So does one mistake at home, 2 mistakes at home, like what is the last straw before we stop making home an option? I think you made a really good point. We have a lot of preconceived notions about not only families, but families' extended members. And we go in and maybe make a decision that someone isn't an option or isn't appropriate, and maybe they weren't in a different scenario with a different child, but are we able to kind of give everyone a bit of a clean slate with each scenario because we're in this difficult situation? And in an ideal world, Uncle Bob would never have been an option, but maybe we need to consider Uncle Bob because of what's happening, because of the fact
And
that
what is
we're
good
in.
enough, right?
So
I think to wrap up this part of the conversation so we can move on so that you guys really get to the meat of why we came to meet with you and we don't run out of time, is I just want to summarize by saying I would encourage you all to really sit around and talk about what is it that communities that care can do in our early upfront prevention. And are you involved in that work so that we can include truant kids? Are you involved in the work of your collaborative management program, in what prevention programs you can fund and blend and braid in order to serve kids and families on that upfront side? So all of this, yes, we want to talk about upfront stuff, but we're in a crunch right now in Moffat County. So this side's moved in and this side's moved in. What are we going to do with this stuff in the middle? And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how do we start addressing this middle of the situation we are in now. Yes, we can start doing this, and yes, we can start doing this, and DYS has done a ton to start addressing this, and their commitments are down and all of those kind of things. And CTC and CMP have started to do this. Now what are we going to do with these kids in the middle? And so let's talk about the new
And to your point, yes, let's consider those kin, but let's just not place them with kin and say, good luck with that. Let's try to envelope them with the services they need to make that a successful placement, because we don't want more than one placement, right? And so that's the other thing we need to be mindful of. So I want to speak to House Bill 181319, which passed, and it's concerning the extension of services for successful adulthood for former foster care youth who are between the ages of 19 and 21. So the misnomer of this bill is core services in statute could always serve the population up to age 21, which I think is really important. The problem is counties don't have the funds. This came with an appropriation, but the appropriation is for a task force to look at this population and see how we can better serve with less money, right? It didn't come with money to serve this population. So you are, and now, so it makes the language stronger that with core services you can now, well, you can't always, go up to age 21. I have counties call me all the time. I have a youth that's doing really well with equine therapy. It's their 18th birthday, and I'm like, okay, continue the service. So that's really important. And Dolly also mentioned that you just got Chafee dollars as well. And so that population can also go up to age 21. So there's some opportunities to go beyond age 18. That doesn't mean that you necessarily would have an open child welfare case, because that normally closes at age 18, but it doesn't mean that the service has to stop, right? And so how that really plays into how our work is going to be changing with Families First Prevention and Services Act is there's a lot of unknowns. It goes into effect October 2019. We have 3 task force and 3 subcommittees and a steering committee that's really looking at Families First and what that looks like. We're not getting a lot of guidance from our federal partners because they're really trying to look at nationally how they're going to do this. This was a very big surprise in February that this actually got passed. It was brought to fruition 2 years ago and fought really hard for, and it never did succeed until this last February. But the biggest part of that Families First Act, you guys have identified the 14 days that we're going to be paying for after October 1 of 2019 in congregate care, right? So that's a huge, big change. But it has been that we've been incentivizing the wrong practice. And so now a lot of the bill is really incentivizing good practice. It's incentivizing that in-home services, the services to families and children, whether it's promising practices or evidence-based, and that's the money they're going to incentivize. So hopefully we know that the menu of core services, or the menu that you saw up there, the money that is given to Human Services, we hope that all of those services will qualify under Families First in getting additional reimbursement funds, because right now it's $53 million state general fund, $3 million federal. So what we're hoping to do is gain a lot more federal funding and expand that funding base for this therapeutic service delivery, so you can be creative about your prevention programs. You can be creative about your youth your services, you're serving youth up to age 21. So that's what we're hoping with Families First, and we most definitely will be giving counties any type of information that we get. There's also, Casey Family Programs is facilitating a compression planning session, which is 6 sessions through the summer. There's 20 of us that are on that compression planning. Tiffany and I are 2 of those 20. And so we'll be communicating all that evolves throughout that committee to all of our counties and communities so that everybody's abreast and everybody has a voice. If you'd like to be on any of those task forces, there's a policy, a program, a fiscal. If you'd like to be on any of that, we welcome any participants, and we will make sure that you have teleconference communication if you don't want to appear in person. But we believe that this is a really Colorado focus and a Colorado opportunity to really maximize our general fund dollars and tap into more federal monies to keep our kids and our families safe and stable in the home. So that's a little bit of what we have about Families First. I would ask for questions, but I don't have answers. What? I'm just kidding, go ahead.
Do we, I don't have Family First memorized by any means, but I do know that there's some areas where Colorado, as well as other states, will get to make some independent choices on which avenue it's going to go. Do we have any idea, or do you guys know as employees of the state, where Colorado is leaning on certain things?
Yeah, 2 things come to mind, and one is we are only one of 11 states that are 4E waiver states. So 4E means our youth, our children and youth are 4E candidates to get federal funding once they reach out of home. And what Colorado said 7 years ago, and then this is the 5th year because we had to apply for it 7 years ago, is that we're incentivizing the wrong things. And Colorado wants to be a national leader in making sure that we serve our families in the home before it gets to 4E candidacy. So we want our 4E candidacy to include kinship placements, trauma-informed care, family engagement, facilitating family engagement meetings. So we want to make sure we're incentivizing the right things. So we're one of only 11 states that have gotten that waiver, and we hope to continue that waiver work into Families First because we have really positive outcomes for those 4 interventions. The other place that I know Colorado is a national leader is that every single state in the nation has promoting safe and stable families. It is part of Colorado's family preservation program, right? We have promoting safe and stable families. It's housed in the Office of Early Childhood. No other state in the nation has $55 million to go to 100% therapeutic delivery, in addition to your promoting safe and stable families. So we have a huge advantage over other states. Other states are just block granted, and they have to use that block grant for therapy and for their congregate care and for their, all of their administration of their child welfare program. So those are 2 places that we hope to highlight Colorado and continue that practice, but really enhance what we're doing with all of the federal incentives and the federal matching money we'll be getting from all of those services that we're providing in the home.
So you said the therapeutic, this extra money, who defines what therapeutic services is in that context? Does that come from the federal government, or does Colorado get to do it?
Well, the most interesting part is, it's not the definition of therapeutic, it's the definition of promising practices and evidence-based services. So that's what they're saying they're going to reimburse. So right now we're looking at...
So it'll go beyond our current definition for services.
Exactly.
It's not just a matter of paying for, I think Craig said this, it's not just a matter of paying for a provider, it's having a provider to do the services.
That is proven has positive outcomes.
Yeah.
So right now we're looking at the California Clearinghouse and the blueprints to look at what is promising practices and what is defined as evidence-based. But at the same time, you're talking everybody in the nation's looking at the same thing. So what we hear they're planning to do is create their own clearinghouse, the federal clearinghouse, of what they consider to be promising practices and evidence-based. And what we hope to do is evolve all the core services into those promising practices and evidence-based, and really train our providers to have those same outcomes so that we do get those federal incentive dollars.
I think what's challenging about Colorado is we're one of only 9 states that is county administered, state supervised. So the feds struggle with what to do with us because that's not a practice that happens a lot.
I went to a conference last October which had people who are heads of their state offices all over the country. It was super interesting to kind of hear what they do, but it was very much at a state level, and you could see that there was it was a little less conjoined than it is here, where you hear about different things going on everywhere.
Yes, conjoined, but at the same time, we honor the fact that we do have 64 different communities and 64 different populations and 64 different ways of doing business, and I think that flexibility is really important to capture the flavor of each community. And so we really try to be as flexible as possible and still have the integrity of what we need to have happen.
And we believe in local control. I think anybody in this room would probably agree that Moffat County is very different than Routt County, even though you guys are neighboring counties, correct? Like, I mean.
Oh, and I'm not trying to imply that it's
Yeah.
word, it
Yeah.
just, it is more unique and it has its own unique challenges, which any scenario does, but when you are one of 9 that have these unique challenges, you don't have as many counterparts to feed off of and learn from and that are going through the same thing.
Right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tiffany, who's really going to talk about crossover youth practice model.
So I'm actually going to give you guys the actual legislation, which I know everybody loves to read legislation, because I know I do, but I think it's important that you have something to reference during our conversation and ask really good questions about. So, as you can see, this was signed by our governor, and this is Senate Bill 18154. And this is our crossover youth plan. And so how this all came about is a group called CCJJ came together and talked about, we have to do something in the state of Colorado about our crossover youth. So if you turn to the first page, section 44.7, it kind of talks about what a crossover youth is. So one of the things I wish that we would have done better in this legislation is define crossover youth, because what this says is a youth with a history of child welfare. So each county gets to really decide what history looks like. So I can tell you that I've been working with about 15 different counties through the collaborative management program for the last year, knowing this legislation is coming down the road on the Georgetown model, which is Georgetown, and Shea Billichek is the one who really started the crossover youth practice model across the nation. And they also let us define what our target population looked like. So in some of the counties, Douglas County is one of the strongest crossover. Douglas and the San Luis Valley are 2 of the strongest models in the state for crossover youth. The San Luis Valley actually won a national award for their crossover youth practice model because it is so good, but they were trained by Georgetown, so they follow it to the letter of the law because it's an evidence-based process. So that being said, how they define crossover youth is any youth that has had child welfare history, whether that is an open case, whether that's an assessment, whether that's a referral, whether that's a prevention case. That's how they define crossover. And then any youth that's involved in diversion, detention, DYS, or probation. So that's how the San Luis Valley has chosen to define crossover youth, is involvement. There are large counties, such as Denver County and Adams County. In Adams County, we've been meeting every single month for a year to talk about their crossover model. They decided they didn't have the capacity, so they've been doing open. So open case, open probation involvement, or open diversion case. And that's how they're defining crossover. So a challenge for you as you take on some of this new legislation is, what is our target population going to look like? Do we want to look at open? Do we want to look at any history of child welfare? And the reason why best practice is any history, and that's what Douglas and the San Luis Valley does, is because the trauma of being involved with the department speaks volumes about what that family is bringing to the table. And so that's why I really believe it's best practice. I also know capacity can be an issue. So that kind of, you can see the actual definition in 44.7 of how the legislation describes a crossover youth, but it simply says history. We don't know what history looks like. So you can also see that the people that they tasked to do this was the JSPC. So that's through your Senate Bill 94 or your CYDC. So every year they have to present a plan to the advisory board, in which I sit on, and about how they're going to do business for a year. And this year in their plans, they have to address crossover youth. So it really is on the backs of the JSPC. However, originally when CCJJ started putting this legislation together, they wanted it to be the collaborative management program. The reason we could not make it the collaborative management program is because collaborative management is an optional program and is in only 64, or is only in only 46 counties of the 64. So what were we going to do about those 20 counties? We didn't know. And even though it's in every judicial district, it wasn't in every county. So that's when it went over to Senate Bill 94. So this is something that I'm sure how many people are in here are JSPC members? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, great.
I go to
so,
the meeting.
But you are. I mean, you're a huge part of JSPC. So
I was for 16 years.
Yeah. So the thing is that it's really going to be on these people's back to make these decisions about how this works, right? So if you turn to the next page, it starts to talk about what the plan must include. So it starts with number 2, and then it goes through A, B, C, etc. But I just want to highlight kind of some of the things that what this crossover plan is going to have to include for your county. So the description of the process. What's the process going to look like? How are these two systems going to work together? And it's not just, what's hard about the juvenile justice system is it's not just probation. It includes detention kids. It includes diversion youth. It includes DYS youth. So those are 3 different systems that how are we going to do those 3 systems and child welfare. So please keep that in mind. It could be 3 different processes. And so how are we going to address and develop those processes? The next is how are we going to collaborate and exchange information, including data? So what does the data sharing process look like between the two juvenile justice and child welfare? The next is information about crossover status. So we have to find a way to promptly inform each other's systems about crossover youth. So if a youth is in child welfare and crosses over to the juvenile justice system, how are we going to get that juvenile justice system information to them immediately? If they are in juvenile justice and cross over to child welfare, how are we going to get that information to them immediately? That's a huge process to work out. When I was with Broomfield County before I came to the state, and I was the child welfare administrator there, we went through the crossover process with Georgetown University. This was the hardest part, is how is one system informing the other system with data sharing agreements. So this is something that's going to take some time for you guys to figure out. I'll go through all of this and then we'll take questions and kind of talk. Go ahead.
Really quickly though, isn't the modified trails supposed to help us with some of that?
So Modified Trails is rolling out a little slower than I think the department had planned on. And I also think that the state court administrator's office has been working a really long time on pulling the information so that the courts have that information. From what I understand, that's a little bit stalled as well.
Okay.
So I hope it gets moving soon, but I don't think we can rely on that. So, because all of this has to be put in place ASAP. Yes, Jeff?
So you know, this county does a fabulous job on that issue.
Oh, good, good.
Because it's not unusual for a handful of folks from the department to be present at an initial advisement on a delinquency case.
Okay, perfect.
It might be because they're worried they want to put the kid in their custody, I don't know. But they're there, and they're listening, and vice versa. And it's not unusual for Tara to be in there on a dependency neglect case.
Which is good because you know the kids and families in your community, right? And which is an advantage of a small community opposed to if you're sitting in a docket in Grand Junction. Every caseworker is not going to know, like, oh, we know that kid, you know? So it is a huge advantage and something that'll probably come a lot easier to you than it will, say, Mesa County. So. And it lists out all the people that have to be informed. It's not just the department and the juvenile justice professionals. It includes district attorneys. It includes JSPC coordinator. It includes like your juvenile court representatives, parents, guardian ad litem. So it's a lot of folks, which once again, I assume will all be in the courtroom for you. Yes.
How does some of this work with like releases and releasing information that we had on this, all of those parties? Not that you don't want everyone at the table, but.
So if you look at letter B, it talks about data sharing. So that is something that will be a challenge for you guys to work out. We do have, and I want to promote, a universal release that all of the state agencies came together to, which was created, I don't know, before me, so 10 years ago or so. But it is still valid. It's called CCYI, and it's a release of information that we encourage all collaborative management programs to use. I believe yours does, but it is a release that's universal.
And on the back of it, it has all the statutes of all the allowable parties to be able to share that information.
And it includes FERPA, it includes HIPAA, 42 Part A, all of those things that have to be included in a release.
Tiffany, would you mind forwarding that?
Not at all, not at all. And it's actually on the CMP website, but I'll
Okay.
send you a link for sure.
I would
So
appreciate
DCJ, or Division of Criminal Justice, is the one who maintains that, but I put a link on my website just so that anybody who wants to use it can get to it. So
Well, I know as a district, we're kind of working on releases right now, and that
I would
might be
encourage you just
beneficial
to
for Kelly.
I
She
mean,
may already have it.
Yeah,
but-
if all the state agencies have approved that and all of our million attorneys have approved those, including HICPUF or Healthcare Policy and Financing, CDPHE, like CDE, all of us have approved this, I would encourage the counties to use it too.
Most definitely.
So, all right, then letter D is appropriate services and placement-based assessment. So, this is the hard part. We're gonna have to have some sort of universal assessment process. So something we have been working on a really long time is that our assessments look so different in juvenile justice and child welfare. Juvenile justice typically assesses for safety of the community. Child welfare typically assesses for safety of the youth. Not that juvenile justice doesn't care about that, because they do, but it is usually what their assessment tools look like. And so juvenile justice typically uses the CDRA or CYLSI. Child welfare uses the safety and risk assessment tool. So what Boulder County has done and some of the other counties have done that have been doing crossover for a really long time is taken pieces of that and had a combined assessment, which is great practice. These are all things, if you choose to do a model that's supported by us at the state, we can help you get resources to all of those things, because why reinvent the wheel if somebody's doing it really well? So that joint assessment. And then F talks about a single case management plan and a lead agency. So I'll get to that in a second. I'll come back to that. A sharing of assessments, and then H. H is really where I come in, and the reason this has been handed to me a lot is because it includes a process for a multidisciplinary group of professionals to consider decisions that are youth community safety, placement, provisions of services, alternatives to detention and commitment, probation, parole, permanency, education, stability. This is exactly what, if you know collaborative management, this is exactly our staffing process, and we call it an ISST, or Individualized Service and Support Team, which leads right back up to F, because in a collaborative management multidisciplinary team staffing, you have to lead with an integrated case plan. So you could, if this group chooses to use their collaborative management program to do this sort of model, you're going to bite off H, F, your release, and your data sharing, all with one swoop. So of the requirements, most of them can be met through collaborative management and already have a process in place. But you do not, please hear me say, you do not have to use your collaborative management program. Is it best practice? Yes. Is it spelled out in the legislation that it is encouraged? Yes, but it's not something you have to do. So in collaborative management, we do a lot of multidisciplinary staffings. How they work across the state varies. However, I would say the best model for the collaborative management program across the state is usually a standing multidisciplinary team. So it's a standing team of a caseworker, a probation officer, a diversion person, someone from the school, all coming together, and they become someone from the mental health center. They become a cohesive team working together. Caseworkers come and staff their youth. Juvenile justice professionals come and staff their youth, and they say, what is the best service for this young person? And we come up with an integrated plan to walk out the door. The families have to be present. So please hear me say, the families have to be present. So in Boulder, which is very much a best practice, they actually have the families kind of present their own issues. So they come to the ISST meeting and they say, listen, I got in trouble because I broke into 10 cars and I stole one of them and I drove to the 7-Eleven and I wrecked it. And then I've also been involved with child welfare because I didn't go to school, and that my mom and dad struggled with substances and those kind of things. They presented their own plan. Can every youth do that? Nope. But some can. And so best practice is that the family is there and we are not making a plan without them. So that philosophy of nothing about us without us absolutely applies here. So Linda, did you have something? And then
I was going to say to your Human Services, that entity can be your Placement Alternatives Commission as well for core services. To talk about, yeah, I'm just saying if you're going to collaborate with all those people together, you already have an entity that's there. Oh, that some of those same people could be the same people.
And so all these people are sitting at the table and saying that we have these resources. So maybe the mental health center is saying, wow, it really seems like that this is a mental health issue, that this is something that this young person is struggling with. Or maybe Mind Springs is saying something like, this kid needs substance abuse treatment. This youth, the reason they're in detention, the reason they're a crossover youth is because they are struggling with substance abuse. Sometimes we don't know which comes first, mental health or substance abuse, or they're so enmeshed, am I wrong about all this, Craig, that we don't know.
And we have 80% of that piece in place with ISSD.
Right, and that's why I'm saying why we would not want to necessarily recreate the wheel in Moffat. Do we maybe need to beef it up to meet some of this legislative piece because it does run through the JSPC? Absolutely. But because you already have such a strong CMP process here in Moffat, I would really encourage you to build on that. You may have to build a different ISST model, but a standing team is really what would be best practice. So
Can I ask a quick question
of
real
course.
quick? Actually, Nicole, does that sound like it fits with that coaching based?
It's a little bit different. So for us, it's really like, I mean, I think it can go hand in hand, but the coaching piece is more direct service between the caseworker and the child, the youth.
But as far as having the youth come up with their own plan to ISST,
Yeah, and I mean, I will say for us, I guess it's not that foreign of an idea because we try to do that in our engagement meetings.
Right.
So that is how I think our department has operated. We don't have meetings about the family without them, and we try to have them present because you don't get buy-in from them if they're not at the table.
and that's one of the things that we're learning about this particular generation of kiddos, especially in the high school age, is that they really want to stand up for themselves, and they really want to speak for themselves, and they really want to make a difference in this world. And some of them feel almost held back by their family situations and those kinds of things, and they'd be easily coached.
Well, and I would say too that that is a huge piece of it, but I think as our agencies within the community, I agree with Marky that we need to look how we're engaging our families, because I have seen and I have observed in meetings, we maybe need to be looking at how we're adapting and not forcing the family to adapt it to us to try to make it work. And I think there's some growth that can happen in this community in that respect. And I think if we start all of our agencies to kind of evaluate that internally, we might start to see some change with some of our families.
Well, and we can bring in some trainings about family engagement because I have, one of my jobs is to go observe these integrated multidisciplinary teams across the state. So I have seen from all of the spectrums, like I have seen the best family engagement meeting ever where we're saying, what is it that you need? These are our concerns, what is it that you need? And then I've also seen something called a family engagement meeting, which I use my air quotes literally because we say, okay, so we think you need to go to MST and we think you need to go to day treatment and we think you need to go to this. Does that sound good to you? Okay, sign the plan.
And we'll see what sticks.
So that is not family engagement. That is very, very different than what I hope any of my collaborative management staffings look like. I cringe at the thought that that's what they would look like. But it happens, right? And so it's a lot about engaging and understanding how we engage families. So that being said, the last piece I want to point out in the legislation, and I know we only have 15 minutes left, is that there is some marijuana, you can use some of the marijuana tax revenue to help with this process. And that comes through your Senate bill plans as well. So that's another reason it came down to Senate bill is because we weren't really sure what to use those 254 funds for, those marijuana tax revenue dollars. So, that being said, we have about 15 minutes left, and I have just like spewed information out at you about congregate care and Moffat County data and your core services plan and the crossover model. And so what I would like to do is maybe give you guys about 10 minutes to kind of talk about what are some ideas, maybe break into a few small groups, what are some ideas about how you want to address crossover? Do you want to address it through your collaborative management program? How do we start identifying our target population? How do we do it? Like, how are we going to do this? I can tell you the best practices across the state when we have a crossover plan and we have a crossover team that meets in this multidisciplinary team is that they come out with one plan that they're submitting to the bench. So somebody, whoever's facilitating that, whether it's the Senate bill person or whether it's your CMP coordinator, they write up a plan and say, hey, these 6 people in this meeting, 4 of them thought this is the best option for them. We had 2 dissenters who think it's this option, and we give that to the judge, and the judge can make an informed decision because they see the discussion, they see who was at the table, they see, those kind of things. I don't know if you guys would be open to be getting that information or not.
It happens right now.
Okay, perfect.
In this.
Okay, perfect. So that, and it comes through a multi-agency staffing model? Oh, okay, perfect. So can we give us 10 minutes and then maybe, or 5 minutes and then we'll have 5 minutes to report back? Does that work? Okay.
So why are those agencies?
Why are they there? Why each one?
But I mean, do we have enough opportunities here?
These kids are way beyond foster. I got a kid who was in a psychiatric facility in Wyoming.
This is crossover, so that's separate.
Family services follow.
That's separate to what we were going to do.
Why sit
They want us to figure out the prices, but sounds like we have a process.
And we have
That kid.
the things like the receivers coordinator are the same. Are you guys aware with the
Off and on.
And there's a lot of these kids that, as far as what their criminal behavior is, puts them well outside of being able to be with a family. Sometimes the only family that can take them, they're
Just 6 or 7, so they're still not. So we make exceptions.
That's part of the commitment rate.
Yeah, it's not very often.
We have the highest of Colorado.
That's fixed with their program.
It does, to a degree.
In schools, yeah.
But there's a situation too. This program is committed, pushback.
Pushback from me.
Not you.
For commitment.
Yeah, we have one right
Oh,
now.
right. So you want to do push car care out of commitment? We put that kid, I commit that kid.
But I'm gonna say, I saw, we all
Yeah, we are. If it's appropriate.
But they're telling us that kids that go into commitment are more likely to succeed than kids that go into congregate care.
No, kids that go into detention.
Detention.
Big difference. Detention is
Is there at higher levels in...
They're already there. All the kids that our kids are the ones that are making the other kids.
Well, and that's one of the things that we do find with a lot of kids, they come to Moffat County because there's a family member here that's willing to take them, and then they get here, and their behavior doesn't change from what it was in Douglas County or Denver or wherever they came here, Wyoming or wherever they came there. And then now they've gone from being involved in the system down there to being involved in the system system up here. So when you get a brand new kid, he brings weed to school, and you're like, well, I want to give you a break, let me run you real quick, and he's listed as a habitual offender, he's 14. Like, it takes a lot.
You have to get listed.
To get listed as a habitual offender, so you call the SRO or whoever down at the school he came from, and they're like, oh yeah, it was almost daily.
We had cake that day.
Yeah. Oh, he's in your community now? Good luck. You know,
that Graceland right now.
Texas. Or Texas.
Sorry, I feel like I'm leaving out.
No, you're fine.
Different legislation because, well, it's a wraparound services for families to reach out to other information. So sometimes I have times they collaborate on an hour and a half. Yeah, but again, I'm just very mindful of their department and their staff, and so I recommend kids go home versus going down corrections. But sometimes it's all work really hard on the extremely terrible right now. The kid was.
Well, I mean, there's some
It's now, it's not appropriate.
Well, my other thing too is, what about the numbers? Because we talked about, like some other counties, one kid puts them over their 6%. Right. You know, we always talk about that Colorado, you know which survey I'm thinking of, the one.
Healthy Kids or?
The Healthy Kids survey, the Healthy Kids Colorado survey, Moffat County, 2.5 per capita of pregnancies in our high school. Yeah, it's because we have a high school of 600 kids. Roughly 300 of them are girl. And when you talk about per 1,000 students, per 1,000 female students, one girl gets pregnant. Yeah, we're at 2.5, which is a high rate for the state. But it's one kid.
Put it in perspective.
Yeah, and in that perspective.
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am.
I'm just trying to figure it
No,
out.
yeah.
Okay.
I mean, everything.
I don't do anything without.
We have something in place, but we're supposed to
The
have it have.
MOU part of the exchange of information is really be something that hasn't been completely worked out.
We definitely need that release.
Yeah.
Because that's
But a lot of the rest of it, they already do presentations of MDT recommendations and they put in their,
Yeah. This network has a process for development of a single
But
system.
they're two different teams of the same people that are different buildings. And as part of this
And they
discussion,
legally identify it.
do we make
So
ISSD?
it sounds like they want someone kind of.
Well, I also think, and I've been thinking about this because I knew this would come down, we also have to look at IOG dollars, how much time do we have?
And Craig,
I just feel like we have enough in our budget, and so hopefully we're gonna free up a lot more dollars with your IOG.
I will,
So, yeah.
I will tell you that I've been
But
begging
still,
Susan to send me invitations to ISST for 4 years now.
We've had a lot of change in coordinator.
We've had a lot of, we always have, I mean, our county is a revolving door. But I've been asking to be invited to ISST.
How about I'm the chair of the CNCC, so here, so I'll
Yeah, and
But as the SRO, I deal with these kids on a daily basis, and my perspective is, these are all my kids. You know, I have 4 kids that are genetically connected to me within the
that's
school.
one of the things though,
But there's 2,000.
Kelly came last week and did a presentation on CYDC.
expand their arm.
And offense was taken when she said, we need to stop thinking of your kid, my kid, it needs to be our kid. And that's been a battle. I've been in this realm for 23 years. It was stated, well, no, sometimes they're juvenile justice kids, they're not always. So I'm ahead of the game a little bit. I have a little bit of data I'm going through, and probably about 90% of my juvenile justice kids I'm dealing with right now were child welfare kids before I got them.
Well,
So,
and again, I feel like there's a rub there for sure, and I'm just an outsider looking in, right? And so, like, my question is that how do we come together in a way we've never had before, right?
I love it.
And so, how do we start thinking about things differently to leaders? There's that, but some of the things that happen every that gets better, because I think for
Let me ask you a question.
the years I've been coming up here, it's been a constant run between juvenile justice and child welfare. How do we get sort of counted?
Well, and why do some programs work in certain counties? And then there are barriers when there's not a barrier over here, and yet it's a barrier here.
Right,
And I don't get it.
Like, there's 3 counties.
Well, they're saying,
in the 14 judicial district. Why is it really working well?
When they say, we didn't go to that one.
Yeah, and I didn't just mean within our district, but no, go ahead.
One of the things that we look at is,
generations.
we're talking about crossover kids. As far as juvenile justice kids, of the 3 counties, we have
The most.
Gosh, yeah.
89%.
I know. I look at your data all the time.
And always have been, and
Probably
I hate to say it, probably always will.
Yeah, and so
But-
how do we fix those relationships?
So the evidence is
We can do
strong.
what's best for these
Early
kids,
intervention.
you know?
But with
So, okay, I'm gonna pull it back
We
together.
have the highest delinquency
All right, I'm gonna pull everyone back together simply because we just have a few minutes and I want to respect your time. And I so very much appreciate you taking 2 hours of your very busy schedules to come here. So, in summary, I want to take just a few comments. Is there a few comments of what you guys talked about? Anyone? Comments?
I think a lot of what you're asking this community to do, we're already doing generally, but I think some tweaks could be made and some improvements can be done to bolster that. What I think is interesting is we have at least 2 J's. How many JSPC people do we have?
There was 5.
There's 4 or 5 of us, you know, that now it's on our shoulders to figure out how to implement all this, but at least in Moffat County, a lot of that hard work's already done with ISST and stuff. So, you know, how do we improve upon what's already here?
So I'm going to say this, and it may not be the most popular thing in the room, but I'm going to just lay it on the table because I've been coming here for quite a while now, and I feel like I know most of the people in this room pretty well. I feel like in Moffat County there is still a rub between juvenile justice and child welfare. And we can make all the best laid plans in the world, but until we fix that, we are still doing a disservice to our families. So my question to you guys is, how do we fix that? Because I still hear my kids and your kids, I still hear, this is the right door, this is the right door, we're gonna have dissenting opinions here and dissenting opinions here, and may the best person win. Right? And sometimes it's going to be juvenile justice that wins, and sometimes it's going to be child welfare that wins. Well, you know who loses? Families. And so, at the end of the day, I can come and facilitate 1,000 meetings, but until you guys decide that you're going to fix this rub between the 2 departments, it's not going to get better.
Right. I think you presented it well and nice in a different scenario.
And then I got mean.
No, you were nice about it, but it's such a serious thing. We all need to put ourselves in we need to put our personal opinion, you're the one with the expertise, we need to put ourselves in the position of the child and the family. But I think the next thing we need to do is, if we're on side A or B, we need to go sit in, what's the term, walk in those people's shoes.
Right.
And that, but you hit it right on the head. Here's the challenge. I think we're aware of it, but I think we're in denial as a community, and I think we're in denial as 2 entities trying to make this happen.
And I guarantee you, and I just want to end on some of these thoughts. I guarantee you there's not a single person that comes in here into their job every single day that doesn't want to do what's best for kids and families. So they're coming to the table and they're fighting their fight because they think that's what's best. And the other person across the table who disagrees with them also thinks that's what's best. How do we step out of our strong opinions of what I think's best and what you think's best to start thinking about what's best for the family?
And that's why the collaborative management is such a beautiful model, because it's 10 independent entities that have one voice at the table. There's not one has more voices, everyone has one vote into those 10 entities, and that's why it's fair and balanced, and it makes sense, because you're all surrounding by this one family, but you have 10 agencies at the table with that one family, right? That's why it makes sense.
And honestly, I think some of your processes are a little bit broken. And I'm not going to leave here without saying some of the things, and I feel like everybody's kind of skirting around because that's my job, right? And so I feel like that there's a process where people are getting their opinions out and they feel like that they're leaving defeated because they're never heard. I feel like that there are other people saying, well, let's let the judge decide because I'm going to say this and you're going to say this and the judge decides. Is that really fair? Is that fair to your judge and is that fair to your families? So.
Well, no, and I think that we already have some really good infrastructure in place. Unfortunately, I do think that, and I'll say this on both sides, that it becomes a little bit of a box checking system where we just go through the steps versus the grasping the meaning behind the collaborative and kind of get a little defeated often at the expense of the kids and the families involved. And I think that there is some inherent conflict in what our roles are, which I get that that's something that I think we all kind of understand from our own perspectives, but maybe aren't as quick to understand from each other's perspectives that there are different roles. And I think ultimately, and I know this is hard for me, and I'm not, like, ultimately it kind of ends up feeling, for me at least, that like everyone gets a vote, but I'm writing the check.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I would challenge you to say that. I hear what you're saying. And two things that I think will get you to the next level. Because we can have these staffings where ultimately somebody's writing the check. I would challenge you to say, are you having a data sharing process where the JSPC and the CMP is working collaboratively as one? I don't think so. I think the other thing is, are you doing a joint assessment? I don't think so. I think if you fix those two things, just as an outsider looking in, if you fix those two things, that's probably a great place to start. So I want to, like, I see that people want to talk, but I also don't want to keep you here till 3 o'clock. So with that being said, I just want to say, those as an outsider, those are the things that I can first point out. I've been doing this job a really long time, so that might be a good place to start. I also want to end on saying, thank you for doing the hard work. This is not easy, you guys, and like I said in the beginning, and I'm going to say it again, I have seen you come leaps and bounds, and I believe in you. I believe you can get there. You've fixed a lot of things. Now let's get over that last hump.
Thanks for saying that, because, you know, I started as a judge in 03. This meeting would not have happened in 03. This meeting would not have happened, I don't think, in 03.
I agree.
Oh, for sure. No, wait, no. Let's go to 93. I'm sorry, I've been around longer than, yeah, and I know. There was a moat around human services, and it's changed dramatically, not just for human services, but all the partners and all the great things that have come with CTC and collaborative management along the way. That it all takes a lot of humility, and it takes being vulnerable, and it takes courage to be here and do the hard work.
And Melinda and I will continue to be Moffat's biggest cheerleader. I promise you that.
And Susie as well.
Yes.
For sure.
Like, we will be your biggest cheerleader because you can do this work. And please, when you guys are stuck in the mud and like mad at each other and it's gonna happen and can't get past it, please say, you know what, I think they're doing what they think is best for kids and families, and I'm also doing what's best for kids and families, so let's push the pause button and say, we're doing what's best for kids and families. How do we stop this rub and just go to something else? So I challenge you to do that. I hope the next time I come that some of those things are in progress. Change takes time.
We hope to be invited.
Oh, yeah, there's that. Thank you. Have a great day. Thank you for the time.
Michelle, I'm interested in hearing what you have to say.
So my question is, does she have it too?
See you then. Sorry, I'm interested in what you have to say.
Oh, fantastic. 5.5 months now.
So you